One of the new project types in .NET Core 3.0 is the worker service. In this video, we're going to be looking at what that project type is, why we should use it, and how we'd install it and get it running. Our specific example today will be a tool to monitor a website to ensure that it's up and running, so we can see exactly how the service operates. The source code for today's video is available to download using the link below in the description. You'll also find links there to sign up for my mailing list and for my Patreon page. As you watch this video, please post your thoughts and questions in the comments below. I will do my best to respond to you. Now, if you haven't come across me before, my name is Tim Corey and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. One of the ways I do that is by teaching context. There are a lot of tutorials out there that teach you what to do. I go a few steps beyond that to show you when to do it, why you should do it or why you shouldn't do it, what the pitfalls are to avoid, and what the best practices are. Basically, I get you ready for the real world. If that's the type of training you're interested in, subscribe to my channel and hit the little bell icon to be notified when I release new videos. Okay, let's get started in Visual Studio. So I have Visual Studio 2019. If we scroll down here, we're going to create a new project. And we're going to select the worker process. So to do that, we can go under here and select service. So worker service. Or we could just search for it up at the top, just type worker service. Now in this case, I'm using a C# worker service, so make sure you have that. Notice that it will install on Linux, Mac, and Windows. All right, we need to give this worker service a name. So let's call it the website status. And we'll call it website status app. And once we create this, it will create our worker service, which we have only really one option here, and that is to enable Docker support if we'd like it. We can do that later if we decide we want that. But for right now, we're going to leave Docker support off. So we only have one option here. It's the worker service, the empty project. Now, note I am using the Preview 8 version of .NET Core 3. As of the recording of this video, .NET Core 3 has not been released, but Preview 8 is the go live preview. And so this will be the same even if you have the full go live version of .NET Core 3. So you hit create, and this is going to create our worker service for us. And there's not much to see when we start this. But before we get into the code itself, let's talk through what are we doing here? Why do we have a worker service? What's this project type all about? The idea behind a worker service is it's a background service, something that runs in the background that just keeps running basically forever. And on your Windows PC, you may notice that you have Windows services. That's what a worker service could be, is a Windows service. And those just run in the background even if you're not logged in. And so you can have applications that are running even when no one's logged onto the computer. As long as the computer is running, those services are running. And that's what a service is. On Linux, it would be a daemon. And those run in the background continually. We can even run these in Azure. But for today's demo, what we're going to do is create a service that will install on Windows and run in the background continually to monitor our website to make sure that it's up. So let's look at what a worker service is composed of. This is a .NET Core project. So we have our appsettings.json, which has our logging information in it. If you've seen my logging video, you know what those settings are. And then we have the program.cs file, which is very, very basic right now, just a couple of settings. And then we have the worker file, which this is where all the quote-unquote real work gets done. Think of this as the true user interface of your service. Now, some people have asked the question, well, how do I get a real user interface on my service? Something I can see. And the answer is, you don't. You shouldn't. That's not a service. At that point, it's just an application. So we're not going to see any output. However, when it comes to testing, that's always been the problem. When we created services in the .NET framework, we had this issue where a service by the .NET framework for definition had to be installed in order to be run, and therefore it was very hard to test. And so we came up with other ideas. I did a video on Top Shelf, which is a tool that takes console applications and allows them to run as services easily, because you can do that even without Top Shelf. But that allowed us to run a console application visually, and then when we were ready to deploy it, we just deployed it, and it now ran in the background all the time. This does something similar to that, in that we can hit the run button right now, and it will run, and it will execute, and we can see it in a console. When we install it, we won't see that console. It won't pop up, but it is doing the exact same thing. So let's look at what this service is doing right out of the box. Just no configuration. What's it doing from the bare template? Well, we have the constructor that's asking for an iLogger, and that's again just the logging information. We covered that in a previous video. So that's just set up for the logger. This is the only real section of work that's new compared to other projects, and that is execute async. And this is an override, so it's coming from the background service class. There's an execute async. It's overriding that and saying, okay, here's what you do when the execute async is called. And it says, while not stopping token dot is cancellation requested. So it's passing in a stopping token. And so in asynchronous programming, I've covered this before in my async await video. Actually, I think it's maybe advanced async that I covered this. We have the idea we can pass in a cancellation token to an asynchronous event to say, hey, I know I kicked you off and I'm waiting for you to be done, but I actually want you to stop now instead of later. And so that's that stopping token. And so this while loop is going to keep going over and over and over again until someone passes in the cancellation token. And that cancellation token is someone stopping the service. Otherwise, it'll keep running forever. And that's what a service does. It just runs. Now, inside this while loop, we log that the worker is running and the time it's running. And then we await 1 second. And again, we pass in that stop token in case we're stopping halfway through that delay. So all this does is it continually runs and it writes out a log entry, and then it waits 1 second, and then it writes out a log entry, and then it waits 1 second continually until something happens to stop this execution. And that stop, I'll just kind of, it's not visible here, but that stop happens whenever you stop the service. Let's see this in action. Let's run this just as it is. And we get that the worker is started when it was started. And we get the worker run message. And now if I hit enter, if you click on the screen, it pauses the output. So by hitting enter, it now shows me the live messages. And notice every second we're getting a new message from our logger. So that's what the service does. If I hit Control-C to stop this, it says application is shutting down, and then it's ready to close the application. So that's actually a close message, which currently isn't visible in our application. That's because there's a override to see that. But if we look at the background service, there's a start async and a stop async. Stop async calls that message that says, hey, I'm stopping now. And that's what logged out the stop. Start is where we start up and do any startup tasks that we need to. So now let's go back here and make this our own. We're going to take this over and do something instead of the basic boilerplate stuff, which is pretty easy to understand. It's just, it runs this method, and the way we kind of pause it between iterations is this task.delay, which is asynchronous so that it returns back that it returns control if we needed to something else. But in this case, it's nothing to return control to. So I'm going to take out this message right here. We don't need that right now. And I'll leave the let's change this 1 second to 5 seconds. If you don't want to check every second for the website being up, that actually would put some strain on our website if we're always requesting the main page over and over and over again. So ideally, this should be more like a minute. And what we can do, what I've seen done, which is I think is a good pattern, is where you say 60 times 1,000, 1,000 being seconds. Therefore, 60 would be 60 seconds or 1 minute. And so that kind of indicates, hey, that's 1 minute's worth of time, instead of saying 60,000, where it might be a little hard to understand. The other thing to do is to change these into constants, but we won't go there. All right, so that would be 1 minute's worth of time, but for this demonstration, I don't want to go like that. I want to do 5 seconds because we need to have something visual, and I don't want to wait a full minute between iterations. All right, so every 5 seconds is fine. And every 5 seconds, what we're going to do is we're going to load our web page using the HTTP client. But if you know anything about HTTP client, you're supposed to open one client for the application, not once every time you make a call. Otherwise, what can happen is you can actually clog up your connections and crash your computer. So let's not do that. Let's open up the HTTP client once. HTTP client control dot to add the using statement for system.net.http. And we'll call this client. Now I'm not going to initialize it here. I'm just going to create the private variable to use. I want to initialize it when the service starts. To do that, I have a public override. And here's my options. One of the options is start async. Now, I will call the base start async because I'll make sure that I do whatever the base was doing, just in case. But then I'm going to, before that, do client equals new HTTP client. That way it starts when the service starts. Now that we have the client initialized, we can call it down here. So we can say var result equals await client.get async, and then make a call to our website. And our website is https://www.IAmTimCorey.com. There we go. That's going to load my website. It's going to wait for it to load. So if this load takes 5 seconds, it's going to wait for that before we go forward. So in theory, if this takes 5 seconds, it's still going to wait another 5 seconds. That's good, because otherwise what would happen is we might be able to step on each other's toes. We're still waiting one, and then we wait 5 seconds and then call it again, and we're stepping on each other's toes waiting for this. Because if it's down, it may have a delay of up to 30 seconds to let us know that. So now we have our website. If we say result dot, we have our content, we have our headers, we have the is success status code, and we have the status code itself. So with that, what we can do is we can have an if statement. If result dot is success status code, then logger.log information, the website was up, is up. Something simple like that. We can even have a status code like so, and then the status code be result dot status code. That way the message has the actual status code, just in case it wasn't a 200, maybe it was another 2 something. Because anything in the 200s is success, but maybe there's more information we can glean out of what our code was. Now, the else statement here, this is what happens if the site is down. Well, we could say logger.log, we could say log critical or log exception. And I want to be very clear on this. Let's do log error and say the website is down, status code. So this would say the website is down. However, this is not how you report that the site is down. This is just logging what happened. That's it. This is not what you use to report that the website is down. Instead, what you want to do here is before this, you'd want to have some call to the database to say, report that the website is down, or fire off an email to somebody to say, hey, your website is down, or send a text message, something like that. That's the actual action that would come out of that service. Now, I'm not going to take it to that extent today because this is not intended to be a complete application. I don't want to spend time on things that aren't really focused on the service itself. But logging is just for informational purposes. It's not a way to then communicate problems necessarily. Okay? So kind of differentiate those two things there. You'd probably want to do more than just log this error. You'd want to perform some action. But for this, we're just going to perform an action. And in fact, I'm not going to take my website down. Therefore, you probably won't even see this error code. Okay, so now we've done the action of actually logging either success or failure. And we're done. And now we're going to wait 5 seconds and do it all over again. Great. So that's the entire service. That's all we have to do. The one thing I want to add, I'm going to add it up here. Public override. I want to override the stop async and say client.dispose. So HTTP client has a dispose method. I want to call that when you stop the service. Basically, we're being a good citizen here and making sure that we're taking care of our connections. We want to leave that HTTP client open as long as the service stays open, but when the service shuts down, we should properly shut down the client as well. So that will run the dispose when the stop is called. So now we have a service that when it starts up the HTTP client. When it stops the HTTP client, and in between, every 5 seconds, it's going to check our website to see if it is up. And if it is, then it logs that, and if it's not, it logs the error indicating so. Let's run this and see what happens. So there we go. The website is up and the status code is OK. The website is up and the status code is OK. And if we wait 5 more seconds, they'll pop up again. Hey, we're still good. So the website is still up and running. If I hit Control-C, that's going to close down the client properly and shut down our service, which at this point is running just like a console application. All right, so our application's working, but now you want to install it as a service. If you're familiar with Windows Services, here's a list of my services that are installed. You'll see this long list of things that run on your computer. So for example, the Xbox Live Game Save, which actually comes with Windows 10. That right now is a manual triggered start for the service, whereas Workstation is running and it's an automatic start. These are all services that run in the background, Windows Update, and so on. What we're going to do is create our own. And we called it website. Let's look for website here. There is no website here. There's web account manager, web management, web client, and then Wi-Fi. We're going to create ours and called it website status. That's our service name. So the first step to do that is we need to think through how we get these messages. Right now, we get them on the console as well as we get them in the output window. But that's not going to really help us when it comes to a service, because a service isn't going to expose the console. It's not going to have the debug window. So how are we going to see what these messages are? Well, in this case, what I want to do is I want to install a tool called Serilog. And Serilog is going to help me because it will allow me to log to a text file. So the first thing to do is right-click on your dependencies and manage NuGet packages. And we're going to install two packages. One is Serilog.ASP.NET Core. Now it sounds a little weird that it says ASP.NET Core. That's ASP.NET Core. But that's actually what we use for .NET Core projects. It hasn't caught up to the fact that there's more project types than just ASP.NET projects. There's other .NET Core project types as well. So ASP.NET Core, that's fine. And I'm installing it. I am installing the previous version just because I'm using pre-release .NET Core 3, but you shouldn't have to check this box for pre-release. The other thing I'm going to install is Serilog.syncs.file. This is a pretty simple one. And what this is it allows us to write to a text file. Again, really simple logging just to a text file so I can see some sort of output as it comes through. Okay, I now have those two installed. The only other thing I need to do for configuring Serilog is to go to program.cs, and I need to add a few things in here. The first one is I say using Serilog. And then down here in I cut this out. Well, you know what? We're going to put it below and we'll put it back in. We're going to say log.logger equals new logger configuration. Now, this is the way that the documentation for Serilog says that you should probably get started using it. We can move this into our app settings.json, but I didn't want to cover Serilog 2 in this video. And so we're going to do just the basics of what they recommend for getting started. So the .minimum level is a debug. And then the minimum level .override. Remember that we can override different levels. We're going to override Microsoft and say that the log event level is going to be, they recommend information, but I am going to say warning. So let's be a little more, not listen to as much. And let's make this into a using statement here. So control dot to add the using statement. And then after this, we're going to say enrich from log context and then write to file. This is what's called a sync. That's the way they identify where to send the logs to. So write to a file. In this case, I'm going to say C:/temp/worker service. And let's call this file logfile.txt. And then .create logger. All right, so that's the setup. That sets up Serilog. That's configuration. That's why it says configuration. It configures it and gets it all ready so we can inject that and basically override the default logger that's built into ASP.NET Core. or .NET Core. Now that we have this, we can actually log the start of our application. So let's do a try, and we'll catch any exceptions just in case we have a problem starting our application. And at the end of this, we will return. So if we have a problem with our application, we're going to log it. We're going to say log.fatal. Notice this is log, L-O-G, not _logger. That's because we're using the static class for Serilog to begin with because we have not yet injected it. So log.fatal, it says, here's the exception, and there was a problem starting the service. Something like that. And we're going to try here. We're going to say log.information starting up the service. And then we'll make our call, this call right here, like so. And afterwards, after we're done making that call, we'll return. Since we're done, we should actually exit the application. Either way, we have a finally here. And that finally is going to run whether we catch or whether we go through the try without catching. Either way, log.close and flush. And what this does is it ensures that if there's any messages in a buffer, that they get written before we close out the application. So what can happen is loggers have to be efficient. And in order to be efficient, one of the ways they do that is they batch things. They don't necessarily always write the log exactly when you call it. Instead, they may wait for a little bit and then write in a batch, in a group. And so if you're halfway through that batching process and you close the application, either intentionally by shutting it down or unintentionally by crashing it, either way, you don't want to lose those last messages. Therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to call the close and flush, which ensures that those messages get written out wherever they're going. So that's the big modification for Serilog. And the final one is after the semicolon, we can hit dot, and it's configure, oops, not configure, it's use Serilog. That's it. Now it's yelling at me here because it wants to not have the lambda expression here. Let's just redo that. I prefer this way. So we have this return statement that returns a default builder, which remember that default builder sets up the debug and the console as two different log sources, as well as the event source as a third. And so we've already got that configured in the default builder. But use Serilog says, nope, not actually. Instead, throw that stuff out. We're going to use our stuff instead, which that's the configuration right here. So that's what happens when we do the use Serilog. So we're already set up for Serilog. We can make sure this is true by running this. And I'm going to move over that folder, and we'll move over the window as well. And notice there's already a log file.txt in this, and there's nothing going on in my console. Now my console, I'll hit Control-C, and it closed the application. If I open up this text file, it says starting up a service, and then the website is up, and the status code is OK, twice. So the application is working as expected, and it's now writing to a text file instead of our console. Now we could add another sync for console and then have both going if we wanted to. But we're not going to need to do that because we just want to see it on the text file because it will be installed as a service. For debugging purposes, maybe we add the console back in, but I think we're good. Now there is one more thing to do before we're ready to make this into a Windows service. Now remember, this is called worker service, not Windows service. And that's because a worker service can run on Windows as a Windows service. It can run on Linux as a daemon, or it can run in Azure. It can also run on Mac. I'm not quite sure if it runs as a daemon as well there or something else. I'm not terribly familiar with Mac. Haven't been for a few years now. So with that, we can't call it a Windows service because it's a worker service. It can do service work wherever it is. So how do we make sure that it will work as a Windows service with some Windows specific things? Well, we need to install a NuGet package. We go to Browse and we search for Microsoft.extensions.hosting.WindowsServices. That's plural. We get this install right here. And this will allow us to configure it as a Windows service. We hit install, we accept, and once we're done, I'll show you the not so big configuration change. Here in my create host builder inside program.cs, I say use Windows service. And we're done. We've now configured this to run as a Windows service. Now we can deploy it. So how do you deploy a service? Well, we're going to do it the manual way. If you have Azure DevOps, this is where you can create a process to do it automatically for you, which is better. But for development purposes, we can just right-click on our project and say Publish. And it says, do you want to make it an Azure web job? Well, no, actually I don't. Instead, I want to publish it to a folder. Well, what folder do you want to publish it to? Let's use this same folder where our log file is. So I'll copy that and I will paste it here. I'm going to create that profile. Now, if you notice, it says, and it's kind of cut off here, but it uses the release configuration. So it's release, not debug, even if we have debug right here. It's release for .NET Core App 3.0. It's framework dependent, meaning that it depends on .NET Core being installed on a machine. The target runtime is portable, or you could dial it into one particular runtime. And the location where it's going to be installed, or at least deployed to, is this right here. Hit save and publish. And if you watch this folder here, once the publish succeeds, there we go. We've got a whole bunch of files in here, including website status.exe and website status.dll. This is the release version of our application, meaning this is production ready. Notice it also has a DLL specific to Serilog and Serilog.NET Core and some of the extensions that we installed. So it has all the stuff specific to our application, all of the NuGet packages we installed, all those DLLs have been brought in. Now we have this website status.exe. How do we actually get this to run in our services? We don't have this service listed here. We could run the exe, but that's just going to run it as a console app. So this is where we have to register this service. So I'm going to bring over PowerShell. Now I've run PowerShell, if you notice the upper left-hand corner, as administrator. You need admin access to run this. And we're going to use a command called sc for not set content, but service control manager tool. Now, there is in PowerShell, and this is PowerShell specific, there is a shortcut called sc, which is set content. So you'll see examples where they say, just do sc, and then they have the command. You can't do that in PowerShell. You can do that in the command line, not in PowerShell. For PowerShell, you have to say sc.exe, which indicates that's not the shortcut for sc, set content, but instead the the executable for the Service Control Manager tool. So sc.exe, we're going to create a service, and let's call it website status. That's the name of our service. And then we have a bin path, and that is bin path equals. And this is the location where our exe is located. And it's located at, notice put a space after the equals. That is required, although I've got it to work without the space, but the documentation says it's required to have a space after the equal, not before, after. So c:/temp/worker service /website status.exe. I don't have to put quotes around this unless there's spaces in any of the paths. Now I do want to set the start equal to auto, meaning it will automatically start when Windows does. And that's it. This will run as a local service, and it will start automatically when Windows does. If I hit enter, it says service has been created successfully. If we come back over here and refresh, we'll now see website status. Sorry, it's a little small. Let's see if we can't zoom in here a little bit. So there we go. So website status is automatic, but notice it does not say running. By default, when you install something, it does not start. So to start it, just right click and say start. Notice it runs as a local system permissions. So start, and now it's running. If we come back to our worker services and look at that logfile.exe or logfile.txt, if we open this up, notice that it started the service a second time, and we've got 3 OKs in there. If we close it out and open it back up, we now have 5 OKs. So this is running in the background. It will continue to run as long as Windows does, or until something catastrophic were to happen. And that is how we install our service. And you may wonder, well, that's great, but how do you uninstall your service? Because we want to put a new version in there. Let's move this off the screen. First thing to do is stop your service. Always stop your service before you do anything else. That does that graceful shutdown and then calls that stop asynchronous method that will make sure our web or HTTP client has been closed successfully. Now we have this done, we can run a new command on PowerShell. And that new command is sc.exe delete website status. And that's the same name we gave it up here. This is whatever name we want to be. The exe is where we have to specify the exe that it actually is. But this is the name you want to give this service itself. Don't put spaces there. You can give a display name, which is an additional parameter here. And the display name can be something more friendly with spaces in it. So sc.exe delete website status. And it deleted successfully. Notice a success here. If it appears like it's waiting, if it does not give you the success, but instead says it's been communicated or something like that to say that it's trying, then what happens, there's a couple different possibilities. One is sometimes this window right here, if it's open, it will cause this service to not be able to close or delete. And so it'll wait for that. And so you just close this window and it will allow it to find delete. The other thing is, if you didn't stop your service first, that can cause it to not be able to delete. So make sure you go in there and stop your service first and then come back and it will be deleted. So just make sure you check those things if you have an error when you go to delete your service. Now that it's stopped, if we look at the log file, notice we have all these right here. So it's been running. We didn't put a message in saying that we're stopping successfully. We should probably do that. But we now have statuses for all of these saying that yes, we're capturing that it is running, and we know that we don't know it stopped successfully, but we should put a log message in there to say that. So let's do this. Let's Control A and delete everything in here. We'll do it all over again, but this time put a message in there saying that I've stopped successfully. So let's come to our worker.cs, and right here we should have a log message. So logger.log information that says the service has been stopped. Something like that. And I think that's good. We could put it over here where we say after this we could put stopping the service or something like that. But I think putting it right in the stop async after we dispose, that way we know that yes, it's been disposed of properly. So with that, we can run this to test it. So you run it, of course there's no display, but we Control C to stop it. If we come over here to our logfile.txt, and sure enough, we didn't even get a chance to run that once before we stopped the service. And it does record that it's been stopped. So let's delete that file. And we say, you know what? Yes, I want to push that to production. So we right click and say publish. We already have the profile, so we just hit publish again. And once that's done, we get our files. We come back over to PowerShell. We push up twice to create the same command that sc.exe create. It's been successful. If we come up here and we refresh our list, it's there and it's stopped. We hit start. It's now been started. If we go back to our file, which is right here, look at log file. The service has started and it's called the lookup 3 times. It's all been okay. And now if we come back over here, let's just indicate, or let's just show you that message if you try and stop it the wrong way. So let's delete this. And it says, of course it does. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. It says it's deleted. Let's see if it actually is by refreshing this. And it says running but disabled, which is odd, right? If we go to a log file, there is no stopping here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 OKs. If we come back here and look again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 OKs. So it's still running, even though I said to delete the service. So what's going on? If we Control A and hit delete, it's going to give you that error that says, hey, you can't do that because it's currently in use. So what's going on? If we come back here and we say delete it again, it says delete failed. The specified service has been marked for deletion. So if we restart Windows, it will delete the service. But since it's still running, it's not deleting our service. Well, if we come over here and we say stop, and now notice it's gone. We don't even have to refresh. It's just gone. If we try to delete again, it says does not exist. And if we come back over here and say delete, we could delete all our files. But first, let's look at log file and notice the service has been stopped. So it got stopped properly this time. Now we can delete all of our files and start over again with a new version. So that's what the worker service is all about. Really simple stuff to get started. It's just this execute async, and if you need to do something with a start or stop, you can override those and open them up. If you want to have some type of messaging or logging coming out of this just to indicate how the service is running, then you probably need to create a new logger like I did with Serilog, where I use that to write to a text file. You can write to a text file, you can write as JSON to a text file, you can write to the console. There's a whole lot of different options, especially with Serilog, where you can use. But in general, that's all you need to do for a service. You'll probably end up calling out to other libraries. You can bring in class libraries here and do more work. And maybe if you're going to do more work, you expand out this delay and say, maybe you don't do it every 5 seconds, maybe do it every minute or something like that. Now, this is not for jobs where you want to schedule them necessarily. There are tools out there to allow you to do scheduling specifically. For example, there's Hangfire that allow you to do that with .NET code, and that's more for scheduling. This is more for long-running processes, things that are continually being running. You might want to, as a service, do things like check a database table to see if any new entries have been entered in. Or maybe you can get triggered by a database table when new entries come in. Or you might monitor a queue to see if anything new came into the queue, and if it does, you do something with it. These are the kind of things that a service is great at. Just that continual run in the background, waiting for something to happen, and when it does, it immediately jumps in and starts doing work. How long you wait between looking is up to you. Definitely don't drop it down so low and so fast that you're going to cause load on your own system. This is not a load test. You don't want it to be every millisecond. But if it makes sense to do it every second, that's fine. If it makes sense to wait every minute, that's fine as well. I would encourage you to try and find that sweet spot between responsiveness, where it happens automatically and quickly, but at the same time not so fast that it's causing performance problems on your system. Okay? So that is a worker service. Love to hear your thoughts. Love to hear what you plan using a worker service for if you do. And thanks for watching. As always, I am Tim Corey.